Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this dynamic clock using geometry nodes. As you can see, it looks pretty cool, so without further ado, let's get to it. So open up Blender, I'll select the default cube, I'm going to rename the default cube to Dynamic Clock GeoNodes. I'll take my cursor to the bottom left until I see a crosshair, I'll left click and drag up to open up a new window. I'll then change this window to geometry nodes. I'll then click new. I'm going to rename this geometry nodes to Dynamic Clock GeoNodes. I'll then zoom in. I'm going to hit N to close the N panel. I'll then select the group input. I'm just going to decrease this window for now, and I'm going to hide the Dynamic Clock GeoNodes object. In fact, I'm going to click this button here and I'm going to ensure that all of these are enabled. So we've got the option to hide them from viewport and render. We're going to add 3 objects into the scene. So I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Mesh. I'm going to choose Cube. I'm going to rename this cube to Tick. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit SZ.1, hit enter, SX.1. I'm going to hit enter, tab out of edit mode. The next object, I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Mesh, I'm going to choose Torus. I'll then take my cursor to the bottom left and expand the Torus options here. If it's not already, set your minor radius to 0.25. We'll then collapse these options and we'll rename this Torus object to Toc. I'll then right click and select Shade Smooth. The next object, I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Mesh, Icosphere. I'm going to right click, click Shade Smooth, and I'll rename this object to Proximity Target. Tab into edit mode. I'll then type in S.25. That will scale it in by 0.25. I'll then tab out of edit mode. I'm going to re-enable my Dynamic Clock GeoNodes object. I'll select that object. I'll increase this window, delete the group input. I'll then hit Shift A, go to Mesh. We'll choose Primitives and I'm going to choose Mesh Circle. I'll then plug this into the geometry output. Maybe I can mute these other parts. So I'm going to hide the tick and the toc from the viewport and the proximity object. I'm just going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. Now for the vertice count with a clock, there's obviously 60 seconds. So for the vertices, I'm going to type in 60 and that will create 60 points. I'll then hit Shift A, go to instances and we'll choose instance on points. Pop that in between the mesh circle and the group output, and the mesh object we're going to instance will be the tick. So I'm going to drag this tick and bring it into my geometry nodes editor over here. I'm going to select as instance. I'll then drag this geometry output to the instance's input on the instance on points, and maybe I'll set the scale to 0.1. Now we need to rotate them so they're all pointing outwards. That's easy enough. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to geometry and read and then choose normal. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to utilities, we'll go to rotation, align rotation to vector. I'll then plug the normal socket into the vector socket of the align rotation to vector. I'll then plug this rotation socket into the rotation socket of the instance on points, and it's probably going to be on the y-axis because this is pointing in the y-axis. So I'll click Y and now pointing in the right direction. Excellent. I'm just going to mute this tick object here. I'll re-enable the proximity target in our viewport. I'll then select that proximity target. Maybe I'll go to my modifiers over here, click add modifier, we'll go to generate and I'm going to choose subdivision surface. I'm going to set it to level 2. I'll then hit G, Y, hold down control to snap it to the grid. I'm going to snap it to around about there. Maybe I can decrease the scale a bit as well. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit S.5 and then hit enter. Tab out of edit mode. Excellent. I want to control the scale of these ticks using the proximity of this proximity target. I'll select the dynamic clock. We'll increase this window a bit more. I'll then drag this proximity target from my view layer into my node tree over here. I'll just drag this group output over here. I'm going to click Shift A, go to instances, and we'll choose scale instances. And I'm going to pop that in between the instance on points and the group output. And now we've got this scale factor here. So we can use the proximity target on this object info as a factor to control the scale. So I'll hit Shift A, go to Mesh, Primitives, and we choose Mesh Line. I'm going to change the count to 1. I'll then plug the location from the object info into the start location of the mesh line. I'll then hit Shift A, go to geometry, sample, and we choose geometry proximity. I'm going to pop that there, maybe just bring these in a bit closer, and I'll drag the mesh from the mesh line into the geometry socket of the geometry proximity. Now we only want to scale on the y-axis. I'll hit Shift A, go to utilities, we go vector and we go combine XYZ. I'll then plug the distance into the Y socket of the combine XYZ and the vector from the combine XYZ into the scale socket of the scale instances. We need to change the geometry proximity type from faces to points. So if you don't see anything happening, I'm just going to select the dynamic clock in the hierarchy up here. And you might have to click a couple of times For some reason, there's a bit of a bug in Blender where it doesn't update. Now we need to invert the effect and also control the fall off. I'm going to box select both of these nodes over here. I'm going to hit G, just drag those across. I'll then drag this combine XYZ across, zoom in over to here. I'll then hit Shift A, go to Utilities, Math, and we choose Map Range. I'm going to pop that in between the geometry proximity and the combine XYZ. The from max, I'm going to set to 0.5. The to min, I'm going to set to 2.7, and the to max, I'm going to set to 0.1, just as a starting point. The way to look at this map range is the from max is how far the fall off spreads, and the to min is how much amplitude is applied to the effect. Maybe we can fine tune this a bit later on. Now we need to introduce the TOC because we've got the tick. So that was this donut. To do that, it shouldn't be as difficult because we should be able to reuse all of these. So I'm going to box select all of these nodes here. I'm going to hit Shift D, and I'm going to take it down to around about here. I'll just bring this across. Maybe let's join these together. So I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Geometry, and we choose Join Geometry. I'm going to pop that there. Okay. I'll then pop this Scale Instances into the bottom socket. So now we'll just change a couple of things over here. So on the mesh circle, we only want 12 vertices. And we're going to change the object info from tick to TOC. I'll also select pick instances. The next thing we'll need to do is remove this combine XYZ because we don't want to scale the donut or the TOC on just the Y axis. We want to scale it on X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to select for combine X, Y, and Z and hit Control X, and that will dissolve that node. I'll then adjust this map range node for 2 max. I'm going to increase that so we make the smallest TOCs slightly bigger. So I'm going to go for something around there just so it encompasses each of these. Maybe I'll set the 2 min, which is the maximum scale. I'll reduce this to, let's say, 2, and the from max, which is the fall off, I'm going to increase this to maybe 1.2. Let's just select my proximity target. I'm going to hit G. We'll see what we've got. Okay, for some reason the ticks are disappearing, so I'm just going to scale out and I'm going to inspect what's going on up here. Okay, so looking at this, so the reason why we can't see the ticks appearing only from top view is because they're only scaled on the y-axis, which came from this combined XYZ, and as you can see, X and Z have a scale of 0, so we need to increase the X and Z axes to 0.1. I'll then hit enter. I'm just going to mute that tick. Now we should be able to see it from every angle. Excellent. I just hit numpad 7 to go into top view. We're going to be using the node wrangler in a minute, so I advise you to go to edit preferences and under add-ons search for node and then enable the node wrangler here and then click this button here and click save preferences. So now we're going to work on the rotation, which will be separate from the geometry nodes. So I'll decrease this window here. I'll then hit Shift A, go to empty, and we're going to choose sphere. I'm going to rename this empty to TOC empty. My scene is set to 30 frames per second, and 30 frames times by 12 for 12 hours will give us 360. So I'm going to change the end of my timeline to 360. Let me just increase my timeline. I'll zoom out so we can see what we're doing, and we're on frame 1, and with this TOC empty selected, I'm going to go to my object data over here, and under the Z rotation I'm going to add a keyframe at 0 degrees. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'm going to skip one more frame. I'll then type in negative 360 for negative 360 degrees. I'll then add another keyframe here, and with my cursor over my timeline, I'm going to hit T, and I'm going to choose an interpolation type of linear. I'll then select my proximity target. I'm going to shift select my empty. I'm going to hit Control P, and I'll set parent with object keep transform. Now, if I select my dynamic clock and hit play, you can see the results so far. Excellent. And it should loop. So if I skip over to here, hit play, we've got a perfect loop. Excellent. Now we need to separate the ticks from the TOCs and the proximity object because I don't want them intersecting. So I'll select the proximity object. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid till it's around about there, just so there's no intersection. Now we need to raise the ticks. I want these ticks above the proximity object. In order to do that, we're going to have to go back into geometry nodes over here. So this top half, this was the ticks. Maybe I can increase the scale on the X and Z to maybe something like 0.2, just so they're a bit bigger. To raise these above the proximity object should be easy enough. So I'm just going to select this scale instances. I'm going to hit G, move it across. I'll then hit Shift A, go to geometry, operations, and we choose transform geometry. and I'm going to put that at the end of the scale instances node. I'm going to zoom in, and under translation on the Z component, I'm just going to increase this gradually until it's just above the proximity object. Maybe I'll hit numpad 1 to go into front view just so I can see what I'm doing. I'll just bring the translation up a little bit more, maybe to something around about there. Excellent. I'm just going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. Now for the tick and tock, we're going to add a material. So I'm going to enable tick and tock in my outliner. I'm going to select for tick. I'm going to go to my material tab down here. I'm going to add a new material, and we'll call this like and subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. You can call it dynamic material. I'll then go to tock, and I'm going to apply that same material to the tock. I'll then mute the tick and the tock. I'm going to select the dynamic clock. I'll then drag these two last nodes, the group output and the join geometry, over to here. I'll hit Shift A. I'm going to go to material, and we choose set material. I'm going to pop that in there. I'm going to hit Shift D and duplicate that and pop that down there. I'll then select the like and subscribe material for both of these set materials. And to make these materials dynamic, we're going to use the proximity of this proximity object to create a mask. So let's work on the ticks first, the top one. In fact, I'm just going to drag these down over to here. I'll drag this one up to here. I'll then box select all of the tocks. I'm going to hit G, Y, just drag them down so we've got a bit more breathing space. I'm going to zoom into the ticks, and with this geometry proximity node selected here, I'm going to hit Control Shift D, and that will duplicate the node whilst maintaining the connection to the previous node. I'll then scroll over to here, in between the set material and the transform geometry. I'll hit Shift A, go to instances, and we'll choose realize instances, and I'm going to pop that in between there. Shift A, go to attribute, and we choose store named attribute, and I'll pop that in between the realized instances and the set material. And the attribute we're going to capture, which will go into the value node, will be this geometry proximity. So I'll just grab this geometry proximity node. I'll hit G. We'll just bring it over here for now, and I'll drag the distance into the value socket of the store named attribute. I'll just hit G, just bring this over to here. Maybe I can hold down Shift, right mouse button and drag just to add a control point here, just so we can see where it's going. And we'll rename this attribute to level up, just so we can identify this as a material attribute. Maybe we can box select both of these. I'm going to hit Control J to add a frame. I'm going to select that frame. I'll hit N to open up the N panel. I'm going to click node, and then we'll see this color option here. So I'm going to select this color option. Maybe I'll give it a color of something like blue, something around there. I'll then hit F2, and I'll rename this to material mask. I'm going to hover my cursor over this blue color. I'm going to hit Control C to copy that color. And under the geometry proximity node down here, I'm going to hit Control J to add a frame. I'm going to enable color, and I'll hit Control V to paste that color. I'll then hit F2, and I'll rename it to material mask. So now we know that everything in these two frames are connected with each other. Excellent. So for this store named attribute to work properly, we're going to have to change it from point to face. We need to apply these dynamic proximity material masks to the tocks down here, and hopefully we should be able to just box select all of these here. I'll then hit Shift D. I'm going to drag them down to around about here. Zoom in, just going to drag this up to here. I'm going to plug the scale instances into the geometry socket of the realize instances, and the geometry output from the store named attribute into the geometry input of the set material. I'll then zoom in to here. I'm going to box select the material mask and its frame. I'll hit Shift D, and we'll duplicate that down to round about here. I'll then plug the mesh socket from the mesh line into the geometry socket of the geometry proximity. I'll then plug the distance socket into the value socket of the store named attribute. I might just add a noodle point here, so I'm holding down Control, right click and drag, hit G just to drag that across. I'm just going to hit N, close the N panel. I'm going to drag this up, and you should have something that looks like this. I'll just zoom in so you can screen capture that if you get lost in the matrix, and you've got this here. Let's just drag this window down. Now we're going to change this from the geometry node editor into the shader editor. I'm going to change the material on this to the like and subscribe material, which should be the same material as what's on the tick and the tuck. I don't think it matters too much that the same material is on here, because we've got the set material in the geometry nodes. The material should be pretty straightforward, so I'm going to keep the principal BSDF. I'm going to set the metallic to 0.5. I'm going to set the roughness to 0.333. Box select both of these. I'm going to hit G, just drag them across there. I'll then hit Shift A, we go to input and we choose attribute, and the name for the attribute was level up. The spelling of this has to be identical to that which was on the store named attribute. So if I quickly flick over to Geometry Node Editor, you go to your store named attribute, hit Control C and copy that value. You then go into your shader editor and hit Control V and paste it. And you should be good to go. I'll then plug the color from the attribute into the base color. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Converter, which is Color Ramp. I'm going to pop that in between there. Maybe I can change the interpolation type from linear to B-spline. I'll just drag this white value across to maybe something around there perhaps. Maybe I'll add another white flag. And we'll just drag this back a bit. We'll turn it to bright white. I'll just drag this black flag across. Maybe I'll add another black flag. We'll change this to black. And this just gives us a little bit more control. So we can change the fall off as we see fit. So I'm just adjusting these flags until I've got something that I like. Something around there. Maybe a bit less on the white. Okay, now if I hit play, you can see it's changing dynamically. So now all we have to do is apply some color to this. We're actually going to be using the emission on here as well as the base color. So I hit Shift A, we go to Converter. I'm going to choose Color Ramp. I'm going to pop that there. I'll then drag the color from the color ramp into the color of the emission. I'm going to add 2 more flags. I'm going to change this first flag. I'm going to drag it over here. I'm going to change it to B-spline. I'm going to change this to maybe something like a green color, something around there. I'll then select this next flag and I'm going to choose a blue color, something around there perhaps. I'll then select this flag. I'm going to choose another blue color, maybe slightly richer blue. And for this last flag, I'm going to change this to like a cherry magenta, something around there. We just drag these flags across until we've got something to our taste. I'm just going to mute my overlays. Okay, I'll just re-enable my overlays. I'm not quite happy with these ticks. I might make them slightly bigger. So I'm going to select my dynamic clock. I'm going to go back to my Geometry Nodes editor and the ticks were at the top. And if you remember, the scaling, the fall off, the maximum was 2 min on the map range. So I'm just going to increase this so it's slightly bigger than the donuts. And maybe I can increase the X and Z value on the combine XYZ to 0.25. I'll just mute my overlays. Maybe I can make them a bit thicker than that even. So maybe I'll set it to 1. Yeah, that's better. Okay, excellent. So now we just need to add some hands on this thing. I'll just go back into viewport shading over here. If you remember, we parented this proximity object to this empty here, which is rotating. I'm going to model a couple of basic hands and we'll do the same for that. Maybe I'll change this back to the shader editor. And with the proximity object selected, I'm going to click new and we'll just rename this material to Be Magnificent. Just zoom in. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Mesh and I'm going to choose Cube. I'll tab into Edit Mode. SX.1, SZ.1. Hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down Control to snap it to the grid until the base of the cube is actually touching the origin. I can then tab out of edit mode. I'm going to hit S to scale. I'm going to scale it in to maybe something around about there. Maybe I can hit S Shift Y to scale it on every axis excluding the Y axis, something around there. I'll then hit Control A and I'm going to apply the scale. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to go to X-ray view. I'm going to select all the vertices at the end. I'm going to hit S and hold down Control to snap it to the grid to around about there. I'll then tab out of edit mode. So that's the first hand. Numpad 3 to go into side view. Shift D, Z, drag it up to around about there. S, hold down Control to snap it to the grid to something around about there. Just so it's slightly smaller. Hit Control A and apply the scale. I'm going to shift select the first hand, so both of the hands are selected. I'll then shift select the proximity object. I'll then hit Control L and then I'll select link materials. So now they've all got the same material. So for this first hand selected, I'm going to rename to A, and for the second hand, I'm going to rename to B. So with the first hand selected, I'm going to shift select the empty. I'm going to hit Control P and we'll choose Object, Keep Transform. So now that should be parented to that empty object. So now we need to add another empty object to rotate this hand here. So I'll hit Shift A, go to empty and we choose sphere. We'll rename this empty to tick empty. So we got tock empty and tick empty. So with tick empty selected, I'm going to go to my object data over here and on frame 1 on your timeline on the Z axis set to 0. I'm going to add a keyframe. I'll then skip to the last frame, which is frame 360. I'm going to skip one more frame. And if you remember, the calculation was 30 times 12, which is 360. So that was the calculation for this one. So for this one, it's going to be 360 times 12, which is 4,320. So in your Z rotation on frame 361, we're going to type in -4320 and hit enter, and then add a keyframe there. Again, take your cursor to your timeline, hit T, and then change the interpolation type to linear. So now we need to select the B hand, and in the outliner over here, I'm going to hold down Control and select the tick empty. I'll then take my cursor to the 3D viewport. I'm going to hit Control P, and we're going to set the parent with Object Keep Transform. So now if I go into top view, I'm just going to deselect everything. If I hit play, you can see for every 360 degrees this rotates, this travels for a 1 hour increment. Let's just do a basic scene setup now. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to choose Plane. I'll then hit S4 to scale it up by 4. I'm going to hit Enter. I'll then hit Control A and apply the scale. I hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then zoom in. I'm going to skip to the first frame. G, Z, hold down Control, snap it to the grid, and make sure the plane is below the lowest point of the dynamic clock. I'm going to give this a separate material. So I'm going to click Add New Material, and we'll call this Ground Plane. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'm going to disable X-ray. I'll select my default lamp. I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to go to my world settings over here, and for the background color, I'm going to set to black. And for the strength, I'm going to set to 0. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to light, and I'm going to choose sun, and under the object data with my sun selected, I'm going to change the rotation on the -X by maybe -30 degrees, something like that. So -30. I'm going to go to my sun lamp data over here. I'm going to change the strength to 5, and I'm going to increase the angle to, let's say, 15, and that will soften up your shadows. I'll then select the background plane, and I'm going to decrease the base color to a dark color. I'll also change the metallic to 0.5 just to darken it up a bit. Maybe increase the roughness. Maybe I'll set a value of 0.75 for the roughness. I'll then select the dynamic clock. I'm going to change the materials on here slightly. Maybe I'll disable my overlays so I can see what I'm doing. We need to increase the strength of the emission on here. In order to do that, I'm going to take the color from the first color ramp and plug it into the strength of the emission on the principal BSDF. I'll then hit Shift A, converter. I'm going to choose math. I'm going to pop that in between the color ramp and the strength. I'm going to change this to multiply, and I'll set the emission strength value to 5. Maybe I can drag these flags a bit to improve the effect that I want. Maybe I can change the color of this flag to a grey color. So I'm just going to increase the value slightly, maybe 0.1, 0.2, just so I've got a smoother fall off there. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. I think I might change this end color. So I'm going to change this cherry color to maybe something a bit more magenta-y, something around there perhaps. Just going to re-enable my overlays. I'm going to select the ground plane. I'm going to hit numpad 7, numpad period, and that will recenter my view. I'll then select my camera. I'm going to hit Control Alt numpad 0. That will reset my camera to the 3D viewport. I'm going to change it from perspective to orthographic. I'm also going to go to object data over here with my camera selected. I'm going to make sure X and Y are set to 0. Maybe I'll decrease the Z to 5. Not that the Z value matters when we're in orthographic view. I'll then just toggle the orthographic scale until it encompasses the entire scene, something around there. Maybe I can take my sun lamp. I'm going to decrease the strength to 2.5. I'll then select the ground plane. Just going to drag this up, increase the brightness of my ground plane, just so I get a nice bit of reflection from the emission. And under specular, I'm going to turn the index of refraction level up to maybe 0.75. Just going to go into my render settings over here. I'm going to change it from cycles to EV. Make sure that you've got ray tracing enabled and shadows. These are my shadow settings. These are my ray tracing settings. If you want a better resolution, set it to 1/1, and the same for fast global illumination approximation. Increase this, and you can set this to 1/1. If not, 1/2 is absolutely fine. I'm actually going to render mine in cycles, so I'm going to go to cycles. I'm going to change this window here from the shader editor to compositor. I'm going to click use nodes. I'll then select this render layer. I'm going to hit G. With this render layer selected, I'm going to hit Control Shift left click, and that will add a viewer node, which I'll drag over here. Then hold down Shift, right click and drag, and that will join those two together with a little control point here. Drag that across over to here. So before I render this out, I want to add a little gubbins in the center here and one more light in the center. So I'm just going to go to viewport shading. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm going to choose icosphere. I'll take my cursor to the bottom left and open up the icosphere settings. Change the subdivisions to, let's say, level 4. That should be more than enough. I'll then right click and click Shade Smooth. I'll then hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to go into wireframe view, tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit 1 to go into vertices select, and I'll box select all of these bottom vertices here. I'll then hit delete and we'll choose delete vertices. I'll then box select all of these bottom vertices. I'll then hit E, Z to extrude on the Z axis. I'm holding down control to snap it to the grid. Maybe I'll zoom out, hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid, just so we're well clear of the base. Tab out of edit mode, hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into viewport shading. I'm going to hit S just to scale down. I'm going to hit S, holding down control, scale it down a bit more. Maybe something around there. I'll then hit numpad 3 to go into side view. I'm just going to zoom in and I'll ensure that these hands are encompassed within this object. So I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid, something around about there. Excellent. I'll then shift select one of the hands. I'm going to hit Control L and link materials. So now this has got the same material as the hands, which is the same material as the proximity object. Excellent. So the last step will be Shift A. I'm going to go to light and I'm going to choose point. I'll then hit numpad 3 to go into side view. I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid to around about there. I'll go to my light data over here. I'll then increase the radius so it's slightly bigger than the edges of this. So under your light data over here with the radius, I'm going to drag this value while holding down shift to drag it in finer increments to around about there. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into rendered view and I'm going to change this color to kind of like a blue color, something around about there perhaps. Maybe I can make it a richer blue and increase the strength to, let's say, 25 watts. I'm going to increase the radius to 0.05. Excellent. So now we've got our compositor. I then go over to my render settings over here. I'm going to change the noise threshold to 0.025 and I'll change my max samples just for this tutorial. I'm going to set to 128. I'm going to scroll down until it says light paths. I'm going to disable reflective and refractive caustics. I'll then go over to my outliner. I'm going to disable the tick and tock in rendering and viewport. I'm going to go to my viewport shading and I'll hit F12. When the image is rendered, we're going to close that window. We're going to increase the compositor over here. I'm going to hit N to open up the N panel and I'm going to click View. I'm going to click Backdrop. I'll then click Fit. Maybe I'll increase this window a bit more and then click Fit again. I'll then hit N to close that window. So the first node I'll add will be a fog node. So I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Filter, we choose Glare. I'm going to pop that in between there. I'll change it from streaks to fog glow. You can adjust the mix and the threshold to your taste. I'm just going to keep it like that for now. The next node, I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Color and Mix, and we choose Mix Color. I'm going to pop that into there. I'll then change it from Mix to Add. I'll then plug the original image into the bottom socket. I'll then hit Shift A, go to Filter, and we choose Sunbeams. And then I'll pop that in between the render layers and the bottom socket of the Add node. And we're going to increase the ray length to maybe 0.333. I'm going to decrease the mix factor to 0.1 just for now. We'll probably decrease it a bit more in a minute. I don't want these beams to be 100% sharp, so I'm going to add a blur node. Shift A, filter, blur, and we choose blur. I'm going to change it from Gaussian to fast Gaussian. I'm going to plug that in between the sunbeams and the bottom socket of this mix color node. I'm going to change it to relative and I'm going to select X and Y and choose 2.5%. I think I might decrease the overall strength of that effect by decreasing this factor to 0.05, maybe 0.025. I think the fog glow might be a bit too much, so I'm going to decrease this to negative 0.2, see what that looks like. Okay, that's looking a bit better. So now if I decrease this window, I'm going to go into rendered view over here. I'll click this arrow and I'm going to enable compositor on the camera view, and this is what we've got. Excellent. Maybe I'll just choose a random frame. I'm going to switch it to Eevee. I'll hit play just to make sure that the compositor works with Eevee as well. Maybe I'll hit F12 just to render out a single frame, just to make sure it works well with Eevee too. Okay, that's working well with Eevee. Excellent. If you haven't already, don't forget to save your file. So I'm going to save mine as like and subscribe. And finally, we're going to go to output and choose a file location where you want to save your image sequence or your movie clip. I'm going to save mine in a folder called You Absolute Legends. Except that you can either save it as a PNG, OpenEXR with a codec of DWAA will give you a smaller file size whilst increasing your dynamic range, or if you want to save it as a movie clip, select FFmpeg, go to encoding, change it from Metrosky to MPEG-4 with a video codec of H.264. Medium quality should be absolutely fine for a render like this, and then simply hit Ctrl F12 and that will render out your image sequence. So that's all for now folks. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please hit hit like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.